Okay, welcome to our weekly episode of 3 Minute Therapy Podcast with me, Dr. Michael Edelstein, a clinical psychologist. Been practicing rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, for over 40 years at least. And Kevin Benbow, also a rational emotive behavior therapist in Yuma, Arizona, and Chris Rossini, who's our tech engineer. He's the one with the glue that holds it all together. Today, we're going to be speaking about preferences and demands, which is the heart of REBT. And in that sense, I mean that our emotional problems don't come from our preferences. They do come from our demands. A preference takes the form of, I prefer to do well and get approval, and if I don't, I'm no good. I prefer, actually, when I change it into a demand, it becomes, therefore, I must do well and get approval. And if I don't, I'm no good. But as a preference, it just leads to advantages and disadvantages, not global evaluations. The second area of preferences and demands is a focus on how others treat me. And that takes the form of, I prefer you treat me well, kindly, and reasonably, and if you don't, that's disadvantageous, that's too bad. If you do, that's very good. But when I escalate into a demand, I absolutely must have to be treated well by you. And if I'm not, then this means you're no good, you're a rotten person. And the third area of preferences and demands is the impersonal conditions of one's life. That takes the form of, because I prefer my life to go well, hassle-free, easy, therefore it absolutely must. And if it's not, then my life is horrible, it's the end of the world, and I can't stand it. So being imperfect humans, we often escalate our preferences into demands. We often convince ourselves that because we prefer something to be a certain way, they absolutely have to be a certain way. Kevin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just this morning, I had a personal example where I successfully converted one of my preferences to a series of demands that hit all three of those areas. And then I got to convert it back to a preference with a 3-minute exercise. Long story short, I take a medication that greatly helps me with my ability to walk. Not that I can't walk without it, but it's a lot less painful to walk when I take this medicine. My doctor's office, for whatever reason, decided not to call my refill into the pharmacy. And so I came up with some demands about that. I must have my medication when I want it. My doctor's office and his staff must always be 100% competent and with it, so that my prescription will be filled. And the final one was, my life will be absolutely miserable if my prescription is not filled. So, of course, I felt a great deal of anger as a result of these demanding thoughts. I worked at converting them back to, it's a hassle not to have my medicine. I wish I could have it right now, but evidently that's not going to happen. Just because my doctor's staff forgot to call the prescription in doesn't mean they're all incompetent. It means they're human, and I will live. I could live the rest of my life without taking that medicine, and it would just be a little bit more of a hassle. So that's right from this morning. So live example.
Okay, very good, very good. That's a good illustration of the concept. And now, since demands start with preferences, because I prefer to walk, therefore I absolutely must, you don't really replace the demand with a preference, but you question the demand, and underneath that is the preference. So it's sort of like if something is, say you have your bed covered by your blanket, and then you take off your blanket, the bed's there. It's not that you replaced the bed when you took off the blanket, but it was there to begin with. So we're uncovering what's behind the demands and questioning it and eliminating the demand part. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes, we're de-escalating them. We're changing unhealthy beliefs back into their healthy counterparts.
Yes, yes, back into it, because that's where it came from. And this is a very powerful concept, because most, if not all, emotional disturbance comes from this process of escalating preferences into demand. So once you learn how to do that, then if you have an emotional disturbance like anxiety, anger, depression, that's a red flag telling you you have a preference that you made into a demand, and the solution is to overcome that, to uncover the preference and eliminate the demand. And the way to eliminate the demand is by using the empirical method, questioning the demand. Is there evidence for it? Is there any reason that because I prefer to do well, I absolutely must, I have to? It's the end of the world if I don't. And if you think about it for a few seconds or a minute, you'll see there's no reason why you have to do anything just because you prefer. And the only way that would be the case would be is if you were ruler of the universe, then things would have to be the way you wanted them to be. But unfortunately, neither Kevin nor I have been elected ruler of the universe yet.
And I don't want the job anyway. Strong preferences are they can be very healthy. They can motivate us to act. A strong preference, for example, might motivate us to take some kind of action against some sort of social injustice. Strong preferences can be very motivating, and at the same time, we have clear thinking while we're doing it. Demands tend to result in unclear thinking and quite often, for lack of a better term, half-assed type solutions to problems.
Yes, yes. And when you have demands of others, that leads to anger. That tends to alienate others. So that's another very poor solution to the problem.
Yes. Nobody, I remember one particular professor I had in my undergrad, a Greek professor, very difficult, very angry person all of the time, and wasn't too hard to understand why he didn't have a lot of friends among the students, even though he was arguably very brilliant.
Yeah. Another problem with demands is they tend to lead to addictions. Because I prefer to feel good right now, I absolutely must, I have to, so I'll drink, shoot up, gamble, those kinds of things. So some more dysfunctional behaviors from demands.
Substances are the abuse of substances are the perfect example of short-term hedonism, aren't they? We're looking for a shortcut to that pleasure rather than taking the long-term route.
Yes. And again, comes from the must. I must feel good right now.
Mhm.
In economics, that's called having a high time preference. Having one marshmallow now is more important than two marshmallows in an hour.
Right. That's an interesting experiment that was done. People would take the smaller amount now as opposed to the larger amount later. Uh, there's a whole tangent we could go on, but I'd better not.
Well, I'll go on that tangent briefly. And that is the marshmallow tests were done with kids where they have a choice of one marshmallow an hour, two marshmallows in an hour. And they found that the kids who delayed the immediate pleasure actually had that personality trait. And as they get older, they didn't do as well in school, and older still, they didn't do as well in work because they didn't really get into the habit of putting off immediate pleasure. And as Kevin and I are noting, that's because of their demands. I must feel good right now. And if I don't, all is lost. My life is awful, terrible, and horrible. But the irony is, then they make their life much worse in the long run.
A little bit of patience can really be helpful. Just the other day, I was reading when it comes to investing, you can seek the advice of a professional investment consultant, or you could simply put your money in a say an index fund of some kind. And I was surprised to learn that more than 90% of the time, over the long run, now not talking about short-term speculation, over the long run, over 90% of the time, you'll do better if you just invest and keep it there, and just rather than relying on a high-priced investment advisor. Not to disparage any of those of you out there who might do that for a living. Just found that interesting.
Oh, yes, yes, I've seen that also. That's a good point. And then when people try to do immediate investment based on their feelings of the moment, that's often called market timing. And as Kevin, as you're saying, that's not such a good idea.
Yeah, the thing is, you only have to be successful once at it. But then again, that it gets to be more like gambling than investing. And again, it's our tendency to demand. I have to have what I want right now. I have to have it right now. I have to do this right now. And that's a fiction. You don't have to have it.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Okay, that's about all I was going to say about this, preferences versus demands. Anything you wanted to add, Kevin?
No, I think I'm good. Thanks.
Good, good. Okay, well, thanks, Kevin, for joining us, and Chris Rossini for doing the technical end of it. If you have any comments, please put them below. If you would like to give us a thumbs up, if you got something out of this, do that. And if you would like to be a guest, please let us know. We always love to have guests. We have a guest intermittently. If you have suggestions for subjects, let us know. We'd be happy to address that. And donate to Patreon to help support us. And tune into the 3 Minute Therapy podcast in the future to stay on the rational side of life.